Well, breaking news in this hour, Glenn Greenwald, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the very left-wing Intercept website, has resigned over his own outlet's censorship of his Biden critiques. We'll be bringing you more from that as the show goes on. But for the time being, welcome to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief of thenationalpulse.com. We are, of course, incredibly close to Election Day here in the United States. Thursday, October the 29th, the year of our Lord 2020, broadcasting live from downtown Washington, D.C. Now, of course, this morning, if you are Real America's Voice or a War Room Pandemic viewer, you will have heard and watched many of the documents that we have extracted from my little friend here. Yes, this is the hard drive from hell, or at least one copy of it. Hunter Biden's hard drive is the gift that keeps on giving, but not if you're Joe Biden, and certainly not if you're Glenn Greenwald over at The Intercept. Just before we get to my very special in-studio guest, I want to give you guys a bit of background about The Intercept. Glenn Greenwald started this up with fellow left-wing reporters, but it's owned by a chap called Pierre Omidyar. Pierre Omidyar isn't his real name. His real name is Parviz Omidyar, and he immigrated to France with his parents from Iran. And now it seems he's trying to do to Glenn Greenwald what the Iranian mullahs would have done to him and his family once upon a time: censor opinions that he doesn't like. The thing about Mr. Omidyar is that he's also rumored to be one of the big backers of the never-Trumpers in the Republican movement, the never-Trumpers such as Bill Kristol, the never-Trumpers who are behind such organizations as the Lincoln Project. And as I say, this is all breaking news in this hour, so there's plenty of more reporting to come, and Glenn Greenwald's actually going to be publishing his new personal blog, his Substack, much like Matt Taibbi, another left-wing journalist who couldn't find a home within the left media because they wouldn't let him write what he wanted to write. They wouldn't let him opine what he wanted to opine about. They wouldn't let him report the news if it was inconvenient to their preferred political side, their preferred political ideology, their preferred political candidates. And so Glenn Greenwald has promised to publish the things that The Intercept wouldn't publish over at his Substack in the next couple of hours. Just throw to my, we have this new thing here now where I can throw directly to the computer in front of me. I want you all to see it. This is Glenn Greenwald's resignation announcement. And sometimes we go into this show planning what we're going to talk about, and sometimes events, dear boy, events take precedent. And I think this is a very, very important precedent. You know, Glenn Greenwald and I probably don't agree on much. We may not agree on anything at all, quite frankly. But I think what we do have in common is the pursuit of the truth. Maybe we find different things in different places. And Glenn, here's an open invitation to you. If you see this, you may come over anytime you want and go through this hard drive with me. That would be my pleasure. I want to introduce now our in-studio guest, somebody who has traveled quite a bit in the last couple of days, in fact, and we're going to be reminding you of something you may have seen from the campaign trail. I want to introduce Mr. Nigel Farage. Nigel, thank you for joining us here in the Real America's Voice studio. Last time we had you on the show, it was down Skype. You were looking very casual at home. We're really pleased to have you in studio here. I just want to get your thoughts on this real quick. I mean, this is...
Well, it's actually very good to see people on the left standing up for principle, because that's clearly what Glenn Greenwald was doing. I mean, as you say, whether you're on the centre right or the centre left, if you're in journalism, you should be trying to get to the bottom of a story. Get to the bottom of a story and then give your interpretation of what it means. That's how it's supposed to work. What we've seen, and especially since the breaking of the Hunter Biden story, is, I mean, a wall-to-wall attempt to suppress an important story just a week before an American presidential election. And it's happening on mainstream media. It's happening on various websites. It's happening particularly through Twitter, Facebook, and elsewhere. I mean, I honestly can't think I've seen anything more disgraceful in all of my life. And I think the truth of it is, these left of centre, illiberal, they call themselves liberal, but they're not, media outlets, the more people like Glenn Greenwald that resign from them, the nearer the end comes for them, because they cannot go on doing what they're doing. And I think we're going to see the whole media landscape be radically transformed over the course of the next year or two. And it'd be great for you as a centre-right, well, one of my protégés in many ways.
I don't know if you want to advertise
well,
that.
But it's true, it's true. But I mean, if someone like Glenn Greenwald walked in here and did a show for the National Pulse, why not?
Right.
Why not? If the guy is an objective journalist, and I reckon he's proved his colours today, let's start to have media programmes where people have points of view, but they're not afraid to tell the truth.
And I guess, you've seen a lot of this in the United Kingdom. It's almost like, we've seen it with The Guardian, right, for instance, and The Observer, with its reporting around Brexit. Come to a conclusion first and then try and back up the story later.
Of course. The classic Soviet tactic that when you're convicting somebody, make the accusation, then find the evidence to back it up. And goodness me, what have we had for the last 4 years? In my case, under investigation by the FBI, funded by the Russians, as the blessed Hillary Clinton said of me. Just lie after lie after lie that we've seen put out by the left because they didn't like the result of the referendum and they hated Trump becoming US president.
Now, you spent some time with the president yesterday, and I get some thoughts on that when we come back. Stick around, ladies and gentlemen, in the break. Make sure you're going over to thenationalpulse.com, sharing this latest breaking news story about Glenn Greenwald, about The Intercept, and about real news. If you like what we do, fundrealnews.com. We'll be right back. And the leaks keep coming and coming and coming, and we're going to be here to bring you all of the breaking news from the hard drive from hell. In fact, it was our producer on War and Pandemic who said to me this morning, when we launched War and Pandemic, the first episode was Jack Posobiec from What American News, and he was on the show and he was talking about the mandate of heaven that they've lost, that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party appear to have lost in China. Very big deal in China, the mandate of heaven, the idea that you are ordained to rule the country. So we started the year with the mandate of heaven, and we're ending it with the hard drive from hell. That's 2020 for you. In studio with me is Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party, and incredibly famous broadcaster in the United Kingdom and, of course, here in the United States. So famous, in fact, Nigel, that you were on the big stage yesterday.
I was.
With not the big guy, that's Joe Biden, but our side's big guy.
Yeah.
And he is a big guy, which is President Trump.
He's not as big as he was. I don't know whether you've noticed that Trump has lost weight. You can see here he's lost weight. Not because of COVID, but he's looking... Do you know what? He looks more energetic. He looks more upbeat. He's enjoying it more than he was even 4 years ago. To see him in the flesh yesterday was remarkable. I went to Tulsa, the first rally, and there were problems with Tulsa. It was not well organised. They got mugged off by the left online.
Yeah, TikTok.
Nonsense, like 1 million people are coming and all the rest of it. But what was interesting was that Trump's performance at Tulsa was that of an entertainer doing an after-dinner speech. And it was all great fun. And if I paid a couple of $100 for a fundraising dinner and had a couple of glasses of wine, I thoroughly have enjoyed it. But it politically didn't make any sense at all. It didn't work. And when Trump said, I'm going to win, I thought, you don't believe that. It wasn't working. Yesterday, what I saw was Trump, being humorous. Having fun with the crowd. Someone, he mentions Biden and someone shouts out loser. Yeah, he's a loser. All that stuff. But what I also saw was a very much more focused Donald Trump, absolutely sorted with the argument and the pitch. And here's the key, because I now think the next 5 days of this campaign are determined by one key debate. It is optimism versus pessimism. It is hope against fear. Biden is going down the Angela Merkel route of saying there's a bleak, dark winter to come. It's going to be dreadful. Please lock yourself in your houses. because something dreadful might happen to you, and I've seen death in my family. I know how awful it is. And Trump is saying, if we go on the way we've been, actually the cure becomes worse than the disease itself, and things are going to get better. Next year's going to be great. Now, we've had these amazing figures out this morning, stunning figures. You know, last quarter GDP up 33%. I mean, it's a figure so ridiculous, it's hard to believe. All right, let's be honest, much of that is government stimulus. You know, we know that, we get that, but it does show it's well spent government stimulus, not wasted government stimulus. So I see this election as being optimism versus pessimism, hope versus fear. And I thought Trump yesterday was not only upbeat in terms of the way that he looked, his body language, his messaging, but when he said, I'm going to win, he believed it.
You talk about him having sort of this renewed vigour, and you've been through an awful lot of campaigns, ups and downs.
Oh, yeah.
Do you find that actually comes off the back of adversity sometimes?
Yeah, I think when you've been through a rotten time, when suddenly the sun breaks through the clouds, you know, there's a renewed enthusiasm for what you're doing. I also think that he's been buoyed by, I mean, what is happening in the Middle East, and it's not being talked about enough. The rapprochement that is going on between Israel and a series of Arab states, that America, who for 20 years have led my country, the UK, who followed at every twist and turn into an endless series of costly wars, costly in terms of life and limb and money, suddenly America's the peace broker.
Right.
And that's a fantastic thing. And I think Trump himself now feels confident on the world stage. I think he himself now feels he is the leader of the free world. And I think he believes in his own heart that he made the American people a series of promises, and he's done his damnedest to keep them. And I tell you what, one thing I know from what I've seen from all my experience of the last few days here, the big M is with Trump, not with the other guy.
What they call the Big Mo over here,
absolutely,
right?
yeah.
You mentioned and I know you pretty well, and it's not often like you to bring up Middle Eastern politics. It's not something that's necessarily immediately in your wheelhouse or in your repertoire, speeches at least, right? What made you made mention of it on the stage yesterday? Yeah. What made you bring that up?
Because I think that foreign policy, everyone says America's insular, they don't care about the rest of the world. They do care hugely about the rest of the world. And I think one of the great things that got Trump elected in 2016 was a promise of no more endless wars. He hasn't just kept that promise, he's taken it on to converting America into being a peace broker. It's happening in the Balkans. It's happening in the Middle East. This is the guy that crossed the line into North Korea. And I think when Americans vote in this election, I do think the foreign policy perspective matters. Is it back to the bad old days? Is it back to globalism? Is it back to pro-the EU? Is it back to pro-endless wars and intervention? Or is this a new course? And what I was trying to remind people of is the sheer magnitude of what Trump has achieved in foreign policy.
They say over here that elections just simply not won on foreign policy. But the flip side of that is actually if you can show...
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that, because if you actually look at the polls, when Americans have been asked for the last few years, how do they feel about endless foreign wars, they are very, very vigorously opposed to what has gone on under Republican and Democrat institutions over the course of the last 20 years. And I think sometimes, in the noise of an election campaign, to bring in a different dimension that others aren't talking about, I thought it was helpful to do it yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it's the point I was going to make, is that it's not so much that you were raising foreign policy as much as showing that, this guy is doing his uttermost to put domestic policy and domestic concerns at the forefront, America first,
of course.
But not America only, but that actually having a seriously thought through foreign policy helps him do that and helps repatriate a lot of the concerns and brings troops home and brings money home.
Yeah, and overwhelmingly, that is what the American people want. Yeah. And I was just gently reminding them of what his achievements were and pointing out that Biden is a return to the bad old days.
And he's very clear about it himself. In the debates last week, we heard and we continue to hear from Camp Biden saber rattling about over North Korea. And all the while, what about China? What about Max Baucus, who was Obama's former ambassador to Beijing and told CGTN, the Chinese news outlet, not but 2 months ago, that a Biden regime would mean a softening of American policy towards the Chinese Communist Party. We'll get into all of that and bring you the clips from Arizona in just a moment. Stay tuned. Okay, I want to throw to my screen here for a moment. I have this page up from thenationalpulse.com. It's called Biden Leaks. And if you go to bidenleak.com, you can get all the stories that we have been breaking over at the National Pulse from the hard drive from hell. And you may be asking yourself, why didn't you use bidenleaks.com like WikiLeaks or Macron Leaks or all of these? Because look, it was taken by the Democrat Senate Council. Let's put that back on screen. Look at it. The Democrats in the Senate bought BidenLeaks.com. So we have BidenLeak.com. And here's the thing. We keep getting told, oh, it's not real, this hard drive isn't real, none of the leaks on it are real. Why did Senate Democrats buy the domain then? But you don't buy a domain if you think, oh, this is nonsense and it's not going anywhere as a story. This is clearly now. Steve Bannon said it on the War Room this morning. If Joe Biden had any momentum over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, this has killed it dead. And I believe you're starting to see that playing out in the polls. You're certainly seeing it playing out when Nigel Farage and Donald Trump go to Arizona and Kamala Harris goes to Arizona and she turns out 50 people in a parking lot in their cars. I don't know if maybe they were empty, self-driving Teslas. They turned out there. But Nigel, I want to play this clip from you from Arizona with the president. Let's roll this clip.
A friend of mine, a lot of people say one of the most powerful men in Europe, Nigel Farage. Oh. Come on up, Nigel. He's a very non-controversial person, too, right? That's what he's going. Come on, Nigel. He's very shy.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm non-controversial and shy compared to you. I got to say, 4 years ago, I was honoured to come to America to bring the Brexit message, the message that you can beat the establishment. And that is what Donald Trump did. He beat the pollsters, he beat the media, he beat all the predictions. And here's the worst bit, they've never forgiven him for it. They've never, ever forgiven him. They have spent 4 years trying to delegitimize him. 4 years of the Russia hoax. 4 years of a false impeachment. Most human beings under that barrage would have given up. This is the single most resilient and bravest person I have ever met in my life.
Thank you very much.
And when you vote next week, you are not just voting for who the President of the United States of America is, vital though that question may be. You are voting for the leader of the free world. You are voting for the only current leader in the free world who has got the guts to stand up and fight for the nation state, to fight for patriotism, to fight against globalism. You'll be voting for the only leader in the Western world with the real courage to stand up to the Chinese Communist Party. You'll be voting for decency, plain speaking, and a man who in 4 years hasn't just cut your taxes, hasn't just improved the economy, but a man who right now is bringing Israel together with Arab nations in a way that nobody ever believed was possible. And that's what he's done, and I wish you Godspeed. I really do.
Thank you, Nigel. Wow, thank you. Oh. Thank you, Nigel. That's something. Wow, I'm glad I called him up. I'm glad I could. Thank you very much, Nigel. That's something. He's responsible for a lot of things that have happened over in Europe. Very positive things, too. Thank you very much.
Nigel Farage on stage in Arizona.
You've got to laugh, haven't you? You've got to laugh at the president. You really have.
I'm glad I called him up.
Yeah.
Did you know you were going to get called up?
No. I had no idea. I didn't. I mean, 4 years ago, we just had Brexit, and it was kind of planned. Let's bring Brexit into the American debate. The whole argument you can beat the establishment. And I was in the front row. I'd been in Arizona the day before. I'd been following Mike Lee, Senator from Utah, Rand Paul, Senator from Kentucky. So I was with those guys in the front row. And he called Rand up to say a few words. And as Rand's walking up the stage, he points to me and says, really? So no, I was on about 3 minutes notice, really. But that's the way he works, isn't it? If he thinks it's right, he does it. I'll be honest with you, I was very honoured to be asked to go up and speak. And what I said there, I said with genuine passion and emotion. I watched Nicolas Sarkozy years ago become French president. All right, he was going to reform the trade unions, modernise France, smash the system, and he came up against the political class, the media class, the bureaucrats, the trade unions. 2 months in, he decided, I'm going to have the easy life and do nothing. Trump has faced all of that, got elected, so he can do a variety of things. He's faced the deep state in this country, he's faced the media in this country, and he's never, ever wavered. He's never, ever given up. And I've not seen a leader with that kind of courage since Margaret Thatcher, frankly, across the Western world. You can like or dislike Trump's manner, his method of speech, some of the tweets that he puts out, but never doubt the absolute sincerity with which he holds his views. And I have huge personal respect for him.
So come on, just between me and you, what did you talk about privately?
Well, yesterday, not very much, because there wasn't much time. All I can tell you, when you talk to him in private or socialise with him in private, and I never ever betray anything that's said, because he needs to trust people. It's very important in his position. People trying to feed off the back of him all the time. But he's a man of terrific humour, for whom political correctness does not even come into the equation.
Well, you're back on the road.
Yeah.
Early doors tomorrow. Where are you heading?
I'm going to go to Michigan tomorrow and follow the rally in Michigan tomorrow. So it'll be overcoat and gloves and scarves and hats, I think, in Michigan compared to Arizona. And yeah, I mean, look, I came out for Trump 4 years ago. I have been on my side of the pond unwaveringly a supporter of him and what he stands for through good times and bad. I'm here through the election.
Well, from here in sunny Washington, D.C. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the National Pulse. I want to thank everybody who goes over to thenationalpulse.com, shares our stories. We've got a lot breaking about the hard drive from hell. We're going to be breaking more stories as the day goes on, and indeed more as the week and the weekend and next week begin. There's so much that we keep coming across. Every day there's something new. There's some new folder. There are some new PDFs, some new documents, new voice memos, new videos, new images. So you want to go over and make sure you bookmark thenationalpulse.com. I didn't know, by the way, because I'd never done it, but apparently when you go to your browser, some websites, they ask you, do you want to turn on notifications for this site? And I'd never done it. And our great tech guy, Wahagan, he comes to me one day and goes, why don't we have that enabled? And I said, nobody does that. He said, no, come on, let's just try it. Let's see if we get 1,000. We've got 8,000 people in 1 week who have now subscribed to the browser notification. So I want to let you guys know at home that you can do that. Every time we publish a story, you'll get a notification right on your computer, and it really helps the site. So please go and do that. I want to, speaking of, throw to my computer right now. Speaking of one of the emails that came off the laptop. This is from Joe Biden, and it's to me, and it says, Raheem, please stop sharing the obviously very real contents of my son Hunter's hard drive from hell. We'll cut you in on the Burisma cash. Come on, man. Joe, aka the big guy. I was having a little bit of fun before the show today, and I mocked up that email. Of course, the media will probably pick up on it. Somebody at The Guardian's going, it's a fake email. Twitter's going to put one of those things in front of it. This is a doctored image. Our guest in studio is Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party, all the way from merry old England. Nigel, you brought the weather with you.
It is lashing with rain. In contrast to Arizona, where I was yesterday, where they get 8 inches of rain a year. I think we had 8 inches in London last week. No, we've got the tail end of some storm here in DC. But that's not the depressing bit. The rain is not the depressing bit. The depressing bit is you drive around the city at lunchtime, it's like 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning.
Yeah. And it's all boarded up.
There is no one here. But the boarding up is even more sinister. Because the boarding up is not because businesses are closed. The boarding up is in case there are riots, because people don't like the result of elections. And this is the really big stuff that in the end we've got to get into. I mean, the idea that you and I can have a different point of view, we can thrash it out, we can play Punch and Judy with each other, but in the end, the people over there make a decision in an election, and I accept you've won, or I accept that that I've won and lost, and that's the way that it is. But also, we respect the fact that other people have different opinions, because in a free society they're entitled to do so. And what we've gone from, and that's how I grew up. I mean, when I first was 18, going to the village pub, there'd be old boys in there, World War II veterans, having the most vicious arguments you've ever seen. And I thought, God, they never speak to each other again. Next day, they're best of mates.
Right.
Because kind of what they fought for was the right to have disagreements, but to accept the fact that other people have a different point of view. What we've now got, and this is my big fear on both sides of the pond, what we've now got are education establishments, starting from a very early age, going right through secondary education, university education, where rather than teaching people critical thinking, here's a problem, here are 2 alternative solutions, you make your mind up, which you think is the right one. We are teaching young people, there are 2 solutions, one is good and wholesome, and the other is evil.
Critical theory, not critical thinking.
Critical both, actually. I mean, critical thinking is your ability to look at things and make your mind up.
Right.
I worry that what the left have done is to indoctrinate millions of young people into believing that their centre-left, semi-socialist views are morally superior to those that have conservative views. And if you start to believe that you as a human being are better than somebody else because of what you believe, and you could extend that to all sorts of theories that we saw back in the 1930s, you then start to get to a point where people are prepared to do anything to achieve their goal.
It's fine to persecute somebody on that basis, if that's what you're...
That's right. And that's where we're going, and that's why you've got Washington, D.C. boarded up. If Trump wins again,
and the big
they
tech
fear
firms
riots.
doing the same thing. Have you received any big tech censorship yourself?
I have noticed that on Twitter, where I've got a pretty healthy following, that my levels of engagement have not been what I would expect them to be.
Yeah, I've had exactly the same thing. Look, you've talked about consent of the losers, right? A lot, actually.
Yeah, I have.
And that's because of what you went through in the post-Brexit world in the United Kingdom. There wasn't this consent. You had this woman, Gina, whatever her name was.
Gina Miller, who fought court cases. Yeah. But equally, we had the House.
Cadwalader.
Oh, we had, but forget them. We had the House of Lords. We had the BBC.
Yeah.
We had, I mean, much
the old
of
boy that stands outside Parliament.
That nutcase. I mean, much of the British establishment refused to accept the Brexit result. They had to find a reason for it happening. The first one was Russia. Must have been Russia. That wasn't true. The next one was Cambridge Analytica, and that proved not to be true. Yeah. They tried to find for themselves an excuse as to why something they found unthinkable had happened. They tried to delegitimise the result of the referendum and all of those that took part on the Leave side. And it's been much the same story over here with Donald Trump. But
But that's the point, isn't it? Delegitimisation of individual people's choices is what we're talking about here. Forget the result for a second. Think about what it means about their respect for the individual sovereignty of the vote.
And that's why we got Brexit in the end. Because we reached this impasse under a weak Prime Minister, Theresa May, who effectively tried to betray us and sell us something that said Brexit but wasn't. I launched the Brexit Party. Within 6 weeks, we won a national election. And that was the end of it. Because actually, the people that voted for the Brexit Party said, how dare you tell us we're thick, ignorant, knuckle-dragging, Neanderthals. How dare you tell us? Oh, the worst one, we didn't know what we were voting for. And and in a good British tradition, they stuck 2 fingers up to all those that tried to reverse the result of the referendum, and we came through. And I'm hoping that next Tuesday in America, we get much the same result.
Nigel, we're really grateful to have you in studio with us today. Stick around. I want to get to the hard drive from hell and your thoughts on how the media has treated this story.
Yeah.
I know you probably haven't seen the actual, what's on the device for yourself, or at least only what's been reported.
I've seen what you've broadcast.
Right, yeah. But not the device itself. I haven't gone through it, and you're more than welcome to if you ever want to. But I want to get your thoughts on how the media has reacted to this thing. And also, I think everybody out there wants to know what you think is going to happen next Tuesday here in the presidential election. So stick around, stay tuned. The predictions from the man who's got almost every single political call right in recent years, Nigel Farage, leader of the Brexit Party. I want to make sure that you are all following him on Twitter, on Facebook. He's got a mighty active social media presence, so make sure you go away. Make it worth his while for joining the National Pulse audience here today. In the meantime, a word from our incredibly smart sponsors. We'll be right back. Head on over to thenationalpulse.com after the show. We'll be dropping more news from the hard drive from hell. And I got one question. Where's Hunter? Nigel, you once asked a Eurocrat, who are you?
I did.
I want to ask Hunter, where are you?
Well, I'm not sure that's the right question. I don't think it's where's Hunter, it's where's Joe.
Right.
Because did you notice yesterday, when Trump was out doing big rallies in Arizona, what was Joe doing? He was in Delaware, right? Where he spent most of the last 6 months, 7 months in a bunker. But he did do a press conference, but no questions.
Right.
All right? So where's Joe? Because there are quite legitimate questions to be asked about how a son who sadly had a very serious drug problem and no experience in business gets a 50 grand a month job working for a Ukrainian oil and gas company. There are serious questions about a private equity company that was set up 10 days before, when the vice president, as Joe then was, flies to China, Hunter's on the plane.
Yep.
There are very serious questions to ask about both of his brothers, who seem, during the 8 years when he was the VP, to have done remarkably well out of contracts that were awarded. Now, it could be that all three were lucky.
Yeah.
It could be it's got nothing to do with corruption at all. But the fact is, it is entirely and utterly legitimate for Biden to be asked these questions. And
who's going to ask the questions?
Oh, look, at a proper press conference, people would. Of course they would.
But that's the point.
Now, CNN wouldn't ask those questions, and that's the story that you want to get to, and I understand that.
No, but hold on. A proper press conference is open. Right?
Yes.
It's open
Yes.
to the press.
Yes.
These campaigns don't work like that, especially the Biden campaign, and Hillary Clinton's campaign never worked like that. You have to be accredited. You think if I applied to cover the Biden campaign, they would accredit me and let me into these press conferences?
No chance. I mean, look, let's be honest. I mean, the behaviour of mainstream media and the behaviour of the Silicon Valley giants over the course of the last 9-10 days has been one of the most shameful things I've ever seen. One of the reasons I want Trump to win is because I want actually him to put Silicon Valley on notice.
What kind of note? Because you are a renowned free marketeer.
Well, I am a free marketeer, but there comes a point sometimes when a free market, which is something where you should have lots of different people competing, becomes a monopoly.
Yeah. So you think there's a case for antitrust here?
Are we at sort of the Standard Oil type moment in the USA? I think we probably are, yes. I think we probably are. You just look at the sheer influence of those 3 or 4 companies. And if they were playing it with, English expression, but with a straight bat, if they were being pretty impartial and fair to both sides, then I would have less of a problem. But I think what you've seen, and particularly from Twitter, I mean, the New York Post, it is a reputable mainstream publication that has effectively been censored now by Twitter. I mean, that is outrageous. That is astonishing.
Sam Dorsey goes up there to the hearings with Ted Cruz, with his beard down to here, and says, no, it's not censored. People can still post the New York Post story. That's not true.
Just not true.
He lied.
He looked very odd yesterday, I thought. It's as if he's sort of gone a bit odd, got a bit funny. Not sure what he's smoking, but anyway. No, I mean, look, Raheem.
Probably what Hunter's smoking.
Well, I hope it's not that bad. But no, I mean, look, there is a real problem here. And Trump yesterday in Arizona he kept quoting 230, 230, 230. Yeah. And if Trump wins, they're going to have a serious look, at these companies. And I think that, frankly, what I've seen over the last 9-10 days, it's overdue.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because whether you like it or not, you are an international major political figure. Let me try and bring it onto your level. If this were people in your family that were cashing in $83,333 a month from a foreign energy company, which has then further ties with this Pemex deal in Mexico, and the guys at the Pemex deal in Mexico, I don't know if you saw a reporting on this, Hunter's writing to them and saying, I've given you access to the White House, I've given you access to the VP's house, I've given you everything you wanted and you're not returning my calls. We've said for 7 years we're going to do business together. Is that not leveraging your position as the progeny of the Vice President of the United States to enrich yourself?
Look, Raheem, like all things in life, you can see one side of a story and not hear the other, so you need to be fairly objective about this. It looks shocking, but it deserves investigation. And investigation comes through transparency, comes through questioning, and Biden is shutting that down. Not answering anything. He's now playing a completely defensive role for the last 5 days of the campaign. Mainstream media are willfully not pursuing it. Social media are censoring it. We need to know. But I don't know. Do you know something? However much it's being censored, it is being talked about. It is, I think...
That's the Streisand effect.
I think, exactly. I think it is cutting through out there. And... when you see on the one hand, a bloke that can barely string a sentence together without spluttering, telling us that we've got a terrible winter and we must lock ourselves in our houses. And against that, you've got this incredibly, whether you like his style or I do, but this incredibly vigorous young 74-year-old telling us it's going to be great, it's going to be huge. I just think that optimism beats pessimism at the end of the day. I think positive messaging beats negative messaging. It's funny, the referendum in 2016 in Britain, the one that we were never supposed to win, our message was we're going to be free. We're going to be self-governing. Right. We're going to reach out to a bigger world. Their messaging was you lose your house, you lose your job.
It was the juxtaposition between the front page of the Sun newspaper and the front page of the Mirror.
Yeah.
The Sun was the uplands, the future under sovereign Britain, versus I think they literally had a black hole.
Apocalypse now.
On the front page of the Mirror.
Yeah, and that's what you've got in this election here. And, and I get it. I get the fact there are millions of people, older people particularly, who are terrified of this virus. But I think after 7 months now of effectively being stopped from living our normal lives, I don't know about you, but I think most of us have simply had enough of it. And I think the Trump message, which is if you have to isolate because you're vulnerable, well, you can choose to isolate. The rest of us have got to get on with life. Right. I think it is the uplifting message. We're seeing riots now in France and Italy and other countries. And you know what? I think, despite everything that's being said this time round, I think he's got momentum with him, and I think he's going to win.
I've got a gift for Nigel Farage, and he's got a gift for us. His predictions in the next segment. We'll be right back. It seems like a decade ago that these images graced the newspapers in the United Kingdom and all over the Western world. I want to throw to the computer here in front of me now, Nigel. Can you see these images? Do you remember?
I do.
All the way back then. There we are in the
Trump Tower.
Trump Tower. There's the famous, the very famous one there. Yeah. And then, of course, my favourite.
Well, and what an amazing picture, because he's never photographed without a tie on. And you could see in that picture genuine joy in his face. That was the Saturday. The result had come through on the Wednesday. I was the first foreign political person to meet him, and you guys were all with me in tow, and that was the other remarkable thing. He didn't just agree to meet me, he met the whole gang. There was half a dozen of us, you know.
And we all got Diet Cokes.
And we all piled in to his private apartment, and let's be honest, I mean, he was sitting there virtually in shock. You know, at what had happened.
I remember the first question he asked us. He said, "Is it a big deal?"
Yeah.
Is what a big deal? Yeah, the election's a big deal.
Yeah, he was in shock.
Yeah.
He was in shock, but equally he was also already, despite the tiredness of what he'd been through, the abuse that he'd gone through, the shock of actually winning, the meeting Obama the day before.
Right.
But despite all of that, if you remember the conversation we had, and again, I've never betrayed the exact details of this, but he was chucking out ideas. Would this be a good idea?
Yep.
Would that be a good idea? He was already thinking, you know, about how to move this forward.
But would the people like this, is what he kept saying.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. And I tell you what, if I had to sum up these 4 years of Trump and say, what was his greatest quality is courage. Of that I have no doubt, and that was what I was saying on the stage in Arizona yesterday. What is his greatest achievement? We could argue that it's tax cuts. We could argue corporation tax, you know, bringing money back into America. We could argue the Israel-Arab states deal. We could argue crossing the line into North Korea. We could argue, you know, economic growth. We could, all sorts of things we could argue he'd done well or done badly. To me, his biggest achievement is that he's done his absolute best to hold faith with the American voter on the things that he promised. And I think after decades of career politicians who've come straight from college into politics, who've never had a foot in the real world, for whom the furtherance of their own career matters more than anything else, they make promises at election time without ever the intention of carrying them out. And the way that Trump has tried to honour his promise to the people, I think restores faith in democracy, and I admire him for it.
We're up against time here, so I want to hop over to France for a moment and ask you what you think. I mean, incredibly disturbing, sad scenes. Again, beheadings. Beheadings
in France. I have to say that Emmanuel Macron, who I don't agree with on the globalist stuff, the European Union stuff, on the cultural stuff, has been a tremendously good president. You know, he has made it clear they're not going to remove a single statue because Black Lives Matter wants them to. He made it clear that whether you find the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad tasteful or distasteful, it is part of French secular culture that you're allowed to agree or disagree. Interestingly, on the pandemic, he also spoke to the French nation and said, "I'm sorry, we've made some bad mistakes." He's actually, in many ways as a president, excelled himself on this social stuff. I mean, the one lesson from Paris and from Malmo in Sweden, and you've written a book about this, which I did the foreword for, shows you that the woolly liberal ideology of mass uncontrolled immigration, supported by a multicultural agenda which wants to divide us into different groups rather than make our kids feel they're part of one thing, is potentially a catastrophe. And it's why we have to be careful as countries in what we do.
Yeah, I agree. And you gave after, I even forget which one it was now, but there was a major attack in France. It was Paris attacks. And you gave a speech about it back then. So, you know, I think...
Where I pointed out that of the 8 men that had committed the most appalling barbarities that night in Paris, some which we won't even speak about on your show, that 5 of them had come into France across the Mediterranean as asylum seekers.
Right. Nigel, we're up against the end of the show here, and I want to say a great big thank you to all of our audience for making sure you're not just going to thenationalpulse.com, but going to thenationalpulse.com/support and joining up as members. Every single penny that comes to us, and you get lots back for it, including signed copies of my books and hats and monthly town halls with us and all of that. I just want to say a great big thank you to everybody who's doing that. With the 2 minutes left to go here, Nigel, who's going to win on Tuesday?
So I saw some things going on in the last couple of days that I saw in 2016 in the referendum. Number one, energy, enthusiasm, momentum. There's no doubt Trump's got that. Wherever he was a couple of weeks ago, wherever he was after the first debate, which was not his finest hour, the second debate reset the whole thing. It showed that he was in charge. I see momentum. I see this optimism that I've touched on as against the pessimism, which is a bigger reason to actually bother to go and vote. I mean, if I tell you, vote for me, it's all going to be dreadful, I mean, it's not really a very big incentive, is it, to go out and do it. And the other thing I see is this. When I saw the referendum, when it closed at 10 o'clock that night, turnout 73%, the highest turnout for decades in any British election, I thought to myself, oh dear, they must have mobilised more than we did, but actually we mobilised more than they did. The single most hopeful thing that I've seen in the last 48 hours are people that I've met at the meetings, at the rallies, wearing their Trump hats, screaming and shouting as Air Force One comes into land amidst, theatre and drama, the likes of which the world has never seen in politics and probably never will again. And the number of them that said they hadn't voted Trump in 2016, they hadn't bothered to vote. So just because there's a hugely increased turnout does not mean this is bad news for the president. It's a very tough call. It'll come down to 4 or 5 states. It'll probably come down to a total of 20 counties across the whole of the USA, a few 100,000 votes. So it is a tough call. But you know what? The polling methods that are being used by the
You reckon he's got it?
By the so-called mainstream. My money. So Michael Cohen, his lawyer, has put 10 grand on Biden. I today have put 10 grand on Trump. I think Trump's going to win. I put my money where my mouth is.
Stick around here on Real America's Voice. We'll have more. I want to give this to our guest this year, Nigel Farage. My gift to you, our gift on behalf of the National Pulse audience. Look at that. We're going to get a shot. There you go. Nigel Farage, thank you so much for joining us here. Stick around on Real America's Voice. More quality programming throughout the day. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m.